Welcome. It is Verdict with Ted Cruz Weekend Review. Ben Ferguson with you, and these are the stories that you may have missed that we talked about this past week. First up, Democrats, including the governor of Illinois, they're going all in to defend their criminals and their cities that are ruining it. So what is behind this logic? We're going to break it down for you. Also, D.C.'s getting cleaned up, and now we have the Clean D.C. Act, and why other cities might ought to look at the exact same blueprint. And finally, 117 narco terrorists caught in New England, all of them a part of one major Narcos gang. It's a weekend review, and it starts right now. Which, Senator, brings us to part two of this conversation. Let's bring it back home. J.D. Pritzker is a interesting man. He's got a lot of money. He's a governor, and he thinks he's succeeding at fighting crime. But getting illegal immigrant killers and rapists off our streets is quote unquote dangerous, he says. And now it is apparently anti-American. Tie that into your trip to Mexico. I mean, you want to talk about two people that could have gotten together and had one heck of a lunch. The people you met with JD, they'd be like kumbayaing this stuff.
Well, J.B. Pritzker, he is a billionaire. Like many Democrat billionaires, he did not make his money. He inherited it. He inherited a vast fortune, and he's now the governor of Illinois and presiding over a state where the people are fleeing his state, where crime is out of control, where left-wing policies are an absolute disaster. And it's striking. He has the same reality-denying vision. Gavin Newsom has the same thing in California, where they both, it reminds me of that meme of the dumpster burning in the background and saying, everything's fine here. That is today's Democrats just telling you, don't believe your lying eyes. Just make sure to duck the bullets when you're in your living room. But everything other than that is great. J.B. Pritzker says he's succeeding at fighting violent crime in Chicago. And you're right, it is reminiscent of these Mexican government leaders who said they're handling it just fine. Look at the great progress they're making. And you look at the cartels who are murdering Mexicans with impunity and who are committing vast numbers of crime in the United States. Here, give a listen to J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois.
What we won't do, however, is engage in what is a federal effort. That is to say, they have their job, immigration. We have our job, which is to fight violent crime on the streets of our city. And by the way, we're succeeding at that job. But when they bring people in and don't coordinate with us, they're going to cause enormous problems.
So, going to cause enormous problems there, Senator. I mean, if that doesn't sound like a threat, I don't know what is.
So Pritzker claims he is succeeding at fighting violent crime in Chicago. Chicago has had the most murders of any American city for 13 consecutive years. 13 years in a row, Chicago is number one. Chicago's murder rate is 3 times higher than Los Angeles. It is 5 times higher than New York City. It is 2 times higher than Islamabad, and it is 15 times higher than Delhi. And the answer to a billionaire Democrat who is surrounded by police officers at all times. So he's not worried about being mugged on the streets of Chicago. That's not a threat he's facing. He says we've got the highest murder rate in America. We're succeeding. This is Democrat success. But he goes even further. He expresses great dismay that if President Trump is successful in turning around crime in Chicago, that would be a bad thing. Listen to the second clip.
So this is dangerous. They shouldn't be doing it. It's anti-American. It's un-American. And I would tell her to maybe check herself for what does she really believe.
Nothing says we're fighting crime like threatening the woman who's out there in Department of Homeland Security Secretary Noem and saying you need to check yourself, right? And saying it's dangerous and un-American and anti-American to go after illegal immigrant killers and rapists.
It's stunning. The Democrats are becoming more and more open that if they have a conflict between a murderer and a victim, if they have a conflict between a Venezuelan gang member and an innocent American citizen, if they have a conflict between a rapist and a single mom, if they have a conflict between a violent sexual predator and your children, the Democrats will pick the criminal every single time. They're not even pretending anymore to go after those criminals. Democrat Governor Pritzker says is dangerous, anti-American, and un-American. And I think the American people are getting fed up. You know, there was a new poll from AP/NORC that found that a large majority of Americans, 68%, see crime as a major problem in large cities. And the approach of the Democrat Party is they're not going to do anything about it. In fact, the highest murder rate in the U.S., they describe as a success. And what it is, it's reminiscent of the leadership in El Salvador when they had the highest murder rate in the world, and they describe what they were doing as a success. And the only answer is new political leadership that actually says keeping our citizens safe is our number one priority, and we're going to do so. We've seen what happens when President Trump does so in the United States, and the border is immediately secured. We had a 99% decrease in illegal crossings. We saw what happened with President Bukele in El Salvador, where they had a 98% drop in homicides. Ironically, we saw what happened in San Francisco, where President Xi came to San Francisco, and Gavin Newsom immediately cleaned up San Francisco, removed the homeless people, took the junkies off the street, and cleaned up the human feces off the street, all of which demonstrates they know how to do so. If they could do so on Monday, they could do so on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The reason they don't, the reason the crime persists, the reason your family is threatened is because the Democrats politically, their ideology, they think it's better to side with the criminals than it is with you. And that, I don't get that, but that's where we are. And I do think it's part of the reason we see today's Democrat Party getting more and more extreme and appealing to a smaller and smaller sliver of our society.
Final question on this. I believe now that the Democratic Party is in such shambles that they don't even know how to get out of this. There is no real leader. We're being told Obama's coming back and going to, like, quote, start mentoring people in the Democratic Party. That's how desperate they are. The same guy that's the godfather, as I described it on Laura Ingram's show on Fox Friday night, as the godfather of this type of insanity and anarchy. He's the guy that created the AOCs of the party and gave them power. And so you look at the Democratic Party now, I don't want to be overconfident, but what I do want to say is I feel like these midterms may actually be a big opportunity for Republican candidates coming up. Usually you give up seats when you have all three branches in the midterms. There's a chance this could actually work out for conservatives, as you mentioned, because the voters are so sick and tired of the left not keeping them safe. It's not even about the economy. It's about safety.
Yeah, look, I hope so, Ben. I'll confess I'm significantly more worried than you. We've got cross-cutting forces for the midterms. On the positive side for Republicans, the Democrats have gotten so extreme, so whack job out there, that it seems like they took a list of a dozen 80-20 issues and they said, let's take the 20% side of all of them. And in some instances, they've even taken 90-10 issues and said, let's appeal to the smallest sliver of America we can. Generally speaking, that is a really bad political strategy. So that augurs in our favor. On the other side, we have a real enthusiasm gap, and this worries me about the midterms, which is an awful lot of Americans are really happy with the success we've seen in the first 8 months of 2025. President Trump has been winning major victories. The danger is that when people are happy, when they're seeing success, they're complacent. They stay home. I'll tell you what, the left is not complacent. They are enraged. They are outraising Republicans 3-1. They hate Donald Trump. And we just saw a special election in Iowa, state senator seat that Trump had won that district by 11 points. They just elected a Democrat state senator in that district. That, I believe, was an enthusiasm gap, that the left is motivated by rage and hate. And that means that they are definitely showing up. And it's our job to make sure that the common sense majority of this country is not complacent, but realizes if we don't show up to defend what we've got, that's how you get these whack jobs elected in the first place.
Now, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go back and listen to the full podcast from earlier this week. Now on to story number 2. All right, Senator, I want to bring it back home to something, and you talk about cleaning things up. That's what President Trump has said he's going to do with the terrorists and those that are bringing drugs in this country. But he's also doing big things in different cities, and now you have introduced the Clean D.C. Act. Explain to us what this is.
Well, the principle is very much the same as we were talking about in foreign policy with the terrorists. which is when you react with weakness, the result is domestically you get more and more crime. When you react with weakness abroad, the result is internationally you get more and more terrorism and more enemies attacking. The converse is true. When you react with strength with regard to crime, when you lock up murderers and rapists and child molesters, you get fewer violent crimes. Number one, because of deterrence. Number two, because of prevention. You get the bad guys off the street. In D.C., the murder rate has consistently been one of the highest in the entire country among large cities. It is 27 homicides per 100,000 residents each year. That is higher than Bogota, Colombia. D.C., not only that, but if you look at vehicle theft is 842 per 100,000 residents, which is 3 times the national average, and carjackings have tripled in recent years. I'll tell you, actually, one time I was filming several years ago, I was filming Verdict. It was a little past midnight, and we had our truck parked on the street. I was in the studio filming it. The truck was broken into, and my briefcase was stolen on the streets of D.C. If you look at D.C., which is our nation's capital, you've got elected representatives and staff from all 50 states, from all over the country. We had earlier this year, we had a staffer from the White House, from DOJ, who was violently assaulted in D.C., beaten up by 10 juvenile offenders. We had in recent years, we had a staffer for Rand Paul who was stabbed in the middle of the afternoon on a D.C. street. We had a former official in the first Trump administration who was shot and killed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, parked in his car on a D.C. street. The violence is out of control. And it was made worse by a 2022 law in the wake of the George Floyd killing and the Black Lives Matter protest, when anti-police fervor was driving the left crazy. The D.C. City Council and the D.C. Mayor came in and they passed a law that lessened the penalties for violent crimes almost entirely across the board. They lessened the penalty for murder. They lessened the penalty for carjacking. They lessened the penalty for violent assault. And the effect, understandably, was those crimes all increased. If you lessen the penalty for violent crime, the crimes increase. And this is the thing that the left doesn't understand. We saw a Democrat congressman, Henry Cuellar from Texas, who was carjacked in his car at about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. He was coming home with his dinner, and he was carjacked outside an apartment building that, if I remember correctly, 5 other congressmen lived in. That's how bad it was. Now, I will tell you, in the past Congress took up legislation to reverse that 2022 law. It passed the House and it passed the Senate, and then Joe Biden vetoed it. Joe Biden decided, all right, we're not going to let this go into effect. Well, I've introduced, again, legislation that is called the Clean D.C. Act. And the Clean D.C. Act is very simple. It is designed to repeal the 2022 law lessening the penalty for violent crimes. And the Clean D.C. Act, we're pushing for a vote. I think the House may vote on it as soon as the next week or two. I'll tell you, the Clean D.C. Act, it's supported by the D.C. Police Union. It's supported by the Fraternal Order of the Police. And it's a good opportunity. I think every member of Congress, every Democrat, every House member needs to decide, okay, where do you stand? Do you stand with the violent criminals? Do you stand with the murderers? Do you stand with the rapists? Do you stand with the carjackers? Or do you stand with the citizens of America? That ought to be an easy vote, although sadly I'm going to predict I think an awful lot of Democrats are going to vote with the criminals.
Yeah, it really does tell you where the Democrats' mindset is right now, where they can't even agree that criminals should be held accountable. And it also just, I think, tells you about how sinister they are, which brings us to our final story. The idea that because the president wasn't seen like 24/7, totally different than Joe Biden when he was president, by the way, that somehow he was dead was a trend on social media, and Democrats were celebrating it.
No, it really was bizarre. The left was losing their mind because a couple of days President Trump hadn't done a public event, and so suddenly the left, they were so excited. They were so excited that, this means Trump is really sick. He's in the hospital. He's had a stroke. He's dead. You know, Andrew Yang, you remember the Democrat who ran for president? He tweeted out, quote, "I would be pumped to have a president whose physical vitality or mental fitness wasn't an ongoing issue or concern." It's like, what Where the hell were the Democrats during the last 4 years of Joe Biden? The man was almost publicly in a coma for 4 years. He was drooling and coloring with crayons, and the Democrats are like, nothing to see here. No, it's perfectly fine. Yes, we have a White House staffer we dress as a giant Easter bunny to lead him away to keep him out of trouble, but there's nothing to see here. And I got to say, so today, President Trump was asked about this by Peter Doocy. And in fact, Peter Doocy asked about the stories that he'd been dead. Listen to the exchange between Peter Doocy and President Trump.
About a big viral social media trend over the weekend. How did you find out over the weekend that you were dead? You see that?
No.
People didn't see it for a couple days. 1.3 million user engagements as of Saturday morning about your demise.
Really? I didn't see that. You know, I have heard, it's sort of crazy, but last week I did numerous news conferences, all successful. They went very well, like this is going very well. And then I didn't do any for 2 days, and they said, there must be something wrong with him. Biden wouldn't do them for months. You wouldn't see him. And nobody ever said there was ever anything wrong with him, and we know he wasn't in the greatest of shape. No, I heard that. I get reports. Now, you knew I did an interview that lasted for about an hour and a half with somebody, and everybody saw that was on one of your competitors. I did numerous shows and also did a number of truths, long truths, I think pretty poignant truths. No, I was very active over the weekend. They also went out to visit some people at the club that I own, pretty nearby on the Potomac River. And no, I've been very active actually over the weekend. I didn't hear that one. That's pretty serious stuff.
I'm glad it's
well, it's fake news. You know, it's just it's so fake. That's why the media has so little credibility. I knew they were saying, like, is he okay? How's he feeling? What's wrong? I said, I just left. And it's also sort of a longer weekend, you know, it's Labor Day weekend. So I would say a lot of people, no, I was very active this Labor Day. I had heard that, but I didn't hear it to that extent.
I love how the president just trolls the media on this one. Like, yeah, you guys are a bunch of scumbags, and I'm not surprised that this is what you did.
Yeah, no, look, it was absurd. I mean, this president, you can disagree with him on substance. You can disagree with him on style, but the man has enormous energy. I mean, if you look at the first 7 months of this administration, I think there's been no administration in our lifetime that has had more velocity and volume and action. And it has been incredible. And this president, he is going... This weekend, actually, President Trump called me. I talked to him this weekend. He was in great spirits. We were talking.
So hold on, you talked to him while he was dead but alive.
Oh,
That's breaking news.
Yeah, and oddly enough, I didn't have a Ouija board. I didn't have to do a seance, and he was kind of, and it was, we were not talking about Are You All Right? He called me on an issue that he and I had been working on, so we had a substantive conversation. You know, today, the president announced that there was going to be a White House address at 2:00. And I got to say, Twitter went crazy with anticipation. And I think people expected them to announce, okay, President Trump is dead. He's entered a permanent vegetative state. He's resigning. Like the left they were beside themselves, but particularly egregious. I want you to listen to Tim Walz. Tim Walz is the governor of Minnesota. He's a weird dude. And you'll remember for like 12 seconds, he was Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee. Give a listen to what Tim Walz had to say about President Trump and his hopes that the president was dead.
You get up in the morning and you doom scroll through things. And although I will say this, the last few days you woke up thinking there might be news. Just saying. There will be news sometime. Just so you know, there will be news.
I mean, that's sick, and that's the guy who ran for vice president of the Democratic Party.
Let me say, that is sick, and I have never wished death upon Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or any of the Democrat leaders. The president of the United States, whether you agree with them or not, what the hell is wrong with these people where they say they wake up every day hoping, please, 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 let me see that he is dead? You know, there used to be a notion, listen, when Barack Obama was president, I disagreed with a lot of the policies that he implemented. I think they did a lot of damage, a lot of harm to this country. But I wish success on him. I wanted America to succeed. We talked about earlier this year President Trump's State of the Union address. I've been to 13 State of the Union addresses. Every single one begins the same way, with the sergeant at arms calling out, "The President of the United States." And 12 of the 13 I've been to, every House member and senator stands and applauds. And that's true whether it's a Democrat or Republican, whether it's your party or the other party, you respect the office. And so when Barack Obama walked onto the floor of the House, I stood and applauded for him. When Joe Biden walked on the floor of the House, I stood and applauded for him. This year, when Trump walked onto the floor, every single Democrat I saw stayed sitting and would not applaud. And there's something really wrong when you are openly cheering for the president of the United States to die, and the people laughing, and I suspect there were reporters there and there were also leftist activists, the people laughing and cheering, there's something just fundamentally wrong about that.
As before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation on this topic, you can go back and download the podcast from earlier this week to hear the entire thing. I want to get back to the big story, number 3 of the week you may have missed. I want to also move on to the other story that is one that is not getting a lot of coverage, and it's really important. It's why I love doing this show with you. The Sinaloa cartel is now, in essence, in every single major city in America. They have set up a massive network. They are making billions and billions of dollars poisoning and killing Americans. Human trafficking, sex trafficking, child trafficking, the list goes on and on. Anything that's illegal, they've got their tentacles in it. And you may think that you're far away from the border, so this isn't actually in your city or your big city or your area of the country. Great example of that is New England. If you're in New England listening to us right now, you're probably thinking, it's not near as bad as like where we are in Houston at the moment. Well, guess what? You'd be wrong. 171 Sinaloa cartel members were arrested in New England, the DEA has now announced.
That was in a single week. In a single week, 171 Sinaloa cartel members arrested in Boston. The arrest also led to the seizure of more than 22,000 counterfeit pills, fentanyl powder, and packaging branded with the Sinaloa cartel logo. And the DEA agent in charge for the New England Field Division said the Sinaloa cartel is, quote, public enemy number 1 in New England. That's what the Democrats' open border policies have done. And listen to a local news story covering this arrest of 171 Sinaloa cartel members in Boston. Give a listen.
Yeah, and by the way, ask yourself this question, America. Why did you not hear about this on the national news? This is Boston 25 News covering it there.
The Federal Drug Enforcement Administration says a week-long cartel crackdown led to nearly 200 arrests just in New England. The DEA says they were all members of the Sinaloa cartel, the largest drug cartel in the world. 25 Investigates went one-on-one with the DEA special agent in charge about their recent operation. He says the vast Sinaloa network has deep roots in New England.
They're our public enemy number 1.
Jared Forget, the special agent in charge of DEA's New England Field Division, says last week the DEA set out to arrest as many members of the Mexico-based Sinaloa cartel as possible. New England saw the highest number of regional arrests at 171, with 49 in Massachusetts, 33 in New Hampshire. Connecticut saw the most at 64.
Do you think people would be surprised to learn how many members of that cartel are operating probably in plain sight in their communities?
Sure. So Sinaloa cartel in every single state across America, more than 40 countries around the world, and obviously they're in every state throughout New England.
What's their number 1 product they push? Is it the pills?
So we see fentanyl powder and we see counterfeit pills that are made to look like legitimate pills, notably M30s.
M30 pills are counterfeit oxycodone. But Forget says they're also increasingly seeing counterfeit stimulant pills made to look like Adderall. Forget showed us some of the more than 22,000 pills and other drugs seized during the operation, like signature purple fentanyl, and some drug packaging even displaying the Sinaloa cartel stamp.
I'm a DEA agent. I cannot tell the difference between a fake one and a real one. So we need to remind parents, schools, caregivers, everybody in the community, have those conversations with each other, have them with your kids.
Forget says the cartel targets unsuspecting young people online through common social media apps. Many have no idea they're buying potentially deadly counterfeit pills.
171 arrests throughout New England. Does that make a dent?
We're the DEA. We're not going after low-level retail drug traffickers. We are going after drug trafficking organizations, the networks.
How do you disrupt that, something that is so large, so vast, and seemingly so powerful?
Right. It's an ongoing battle, one that we can't afford to give up, right? It's the Sinaloa cartel is a threat to public safety, our public health, and our national security as a country.
This year, the Centers for Disease Control reported while drug overdose deaths are declining, overdose is the leading cause of death for young people ages 18 to 45.
Senator, you hear that report. It should be national news. It's not. Thank goodness we're doing the show to make it national. But this is concerning because it's not just in New England. This is in every major city in America. They've set up shop.
Well, CNN won't cover it. MSNBC won't but cover it. I'm glad the local news covered it, and it is critically important. The cartels, public enemy number one in New England, brought to you by the Democrats, is the Sinaloa cartel. And, it was striking what they were arrested with. They were arrested with among other things, counterfeit pills like Adderall. And those are designed to be sold to your kids. Ben, you and I are both parents. I will tell you it is terrifying being the parents of young kids today. Your kids are younger than mine, Ben. My girls are teenagers. And I think back when you and I were teenagers, you'd go out to a party. There may be some kids in high school. They might be drinking. Maybe someone would smoke some marijuana. But the odds were that you were not going to die going to a party when you and I were kids. What is terrifying now is that kids go to a party and someone says, "Here, hey, try a pill. It's an Adderall. It's a Ritalin. It's something they think is fairly innocuous." And the kid takes one pill, and it is a counterfeit pill that has fentanyl, and the child drops dead. And that is happening at a scale that is truly terrifying. In 2023, more than 100,000 Americans died of overdoses. 70% of those were fentanyl. And overdose is the wrong word for those. Those are poisonings because, you think of an overdose. If you have a junkie on the street who's shooting up heroin, he shoots up a little bit too much heroin. That's a tragedy, but there are a series of decisions that put the person in that situation. This circumstance is much more frightening because it can be one tiny mistaken decision made by a 14-year-old that ends that child's life, and that is the result. Open borders are endangering our families in a very fundamental way.
It's an epidemic, and what's interesting is when you do research on this, Senator, one of the things that's the most shocking about it is a lot of police forces are actually running out of their Narcan, which is what you can give to try to save someone's life when they overdose. Their yearly supply, they're eating through it in 2 to 3 months into the year, and they're having to go to their city council and their board of aldermen, the county commissioners, depending on what type of government they have, and they're having to beg them for more money because they're running through the budget for what they need to save people's lives. That's how big of an epidemic this has become. And again, it's the number one killer of young people in this country. That is something that needs to be said over and over again, and it's something that we must stop.
Well, and police officers and first responders, they often wear gloves. They're very frightened because if they inadvertently touch fentanyl, a tiny amount can kill them. The level that this is deadly is truly unprecedented. And I'll say I want to share an illustration that a DEA agent told me a number of years ago, which we were sitting and doing a round table with a DEA agent and with a mom who had lost her child to fentanyl poisoning. And here's what the DEA agent did is he handed out everyone Sweet and Low packets of the sweetener you put in your tea or coffee. And he said, "Okay, tear open the Sweet and Low packet." And he said, "Empty all the Sweet and Low onto the table." So we all did that. He then said, "Stick your pinky, your little finger, into the empty packet." So we did that. And he said, "Pull it out." And you pull it out, you have a handful of tiny little grains of Sweet and Low that are on your finger. And he said, "That is enough fentanyl to kill you." And it's a very effective illustration. I'll tell you, with both of our teenage girls, I sat them down in the kitchen. I handed them packets of Sweet and Low, and I had them do exactly that illustration. And if you are a parent, if you are a grandparent, have this conversation with your kids or your grandkids, because look, hopefully your kids will not make catastrophically wrong decisions, but in this circumstance, one small decision that seems easy, hey, it's a friend of theirs that has, hey, try this pill, we're all at a party, and they don't think they are risking their lives. I don't know a parent who is not terrified about the risks that their kids will make one wrong choice and it will cost them their entire life.
Yeah, it is. It really is scary. There's no doubt about it. And this is part of the reason why I think the president is also, as you wrap up this last week, going after these drug cartels and saying we're going to use the full force of our government to go after them, since we've declared them terrorist organizations, because
Yes.
they're killing Americans.
Look, obviously the U.S. military took out at Tren de Aragua narco-terrorist boat off the shores of Venezuela just this past week. As you know, last week I was in Mexico meeting with senior government officials in Mexico and making clear to them the United States is going after these cartels, and we're going to do so either with or without you. Yet, listening to the story of the 171 Sinaloa cartel members arrested in New England reminded me of the MS-13 cartel member that I spoke with down in El Salvador. I went to the CICOT, the maximum security terrorist prison. And if you didn't listen to our podcast last week, let me encourage every one of you, go back and listen to last week's podcast where I take you inside this prison, this maximum security prison built for 40,000 gang members, mass murderers, and terrorists. And I met with one MS-13 gang member who'd lived in Texas many years. He spoke perfectly fluent English. He became an MS-13 member when he was 13 years old, living in Falls Church, Virginia. That's the level at which these gangs have penetrated our society. And by the way, the only way you become a member of MS-13 is you have to murder someone. So at age 13, he murdered someone to become a member of this gang. When I asked him why he did it, he said all of his friends were doing the same thing, that he was hanging out with other 13-year-olds who were joining the same gang. And this is now a 42-year-old man who's spending the rest of his life in a maximum security prison because of the multiple murders he committed. That is not in Colombia. That's not deep in Mexico City. That was Falls Church, Virginia. And later he moved to Dallas, Texas. We've heard New England. This is public enemy number one. You and I and our families, we want the border secured. And I'm grateful that we have a president and commander-in-chief who says we are going to stop the human trafficking. We're going to stop the drug trafficking. We are securing the border. That's an incredible success, and it's incredibly important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And also Reuters is now reporting, and this is just showing, I think, the president's commitment to fighting these narco-terrorists. Reuters is now saying the U.S. is deploying stealth fighter jets to the Caribbean for drug fight as the tensions with Venezuela continue to rise. They're saying, Axios is saying that 10 F-35 jets are being dispatched also to Puerto Rico to support the drug war there. And this is on top of
And Ben, when I was down at the Panama Canal, I actually saw the USS Lake Erie that was transiting from the Pacific to the Caribbean specifically to participate in the war on drugs. This is a missile ship with enormous capacity. I don't know if this was the particular ship that took out the Tren de Aragua, but I went and toured the ship, met many of the sailors on board. We are moving major assets to take on the cartels and to defeat the cartels.
As always, thank you for listening to Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Don't forget to download my podcast, and you can listen to my podcast every other day you're not listening to Verdict, or each day when you listen to Verdict afterwards. I'd love to have you as a listener to, again, the Ben Ferguson podcast, and we will see you back here on Monday morning.